You already see it now, right? We still have a lot of people in poverty, in energy poverty, but it's a lot less than it was 20 years ago. And if we can crack the clean energy conundrum and really be able to provide plentiful clean energy around the world that enables all of the other technologies that make our lives better, we'll be in a better place.
Just because the facts are A, if the narrative is B and everyone believes the narrative, then B is what matters. But it's our job in our industry to speak up proudly, soberly, and to engage people in this dialogue. Those 2.5 billion people that are in energy poverty, they need us.
America cannot meet this threat alone.
If there is a single country,
of course, the world cannot meet it without America.
that is willing to
We're going to need you, the next generation, to finish the
overhaul
job.
nuclear regulation
We need scientists to design new
and
fuels.
focus on net public
We need
benefit
engineers to invent new technologies. We
over absurd levels of radiation
need
protection,
entrepreneurs to sell those
then
technologies.
we will march towards this.
We need workers to operate assembly lines that hum with high-tech, zero-carbon
We have
components.
unlimited prosperity for all humans.
We need diplomats and businessmen and women and Peace Corps volunteers to help developing nations skip past the dirty phase of development and transition to sustainable sources of energy. In other words, we need you.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Fire Diffusion Podcast. My name is Mark Hinaman, and we're joined today by Craig Piercy, the CEO of the American Nuclear Society. Craig, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Mark?
Fantastic. Very excited to chat with you. We've got a lot to cover and a lot to talk about. Let's dive right in. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Who is Craig Piercy? Maybe a 30-second overview of kind of your current position, and then we'll dive into some of your background and talk about how you got there.
Sure. Again, my name is Craig Piercy, and I'm the Executive Director and CEO of the American Nuclear Society. So it's a job I've had for a little over 3 years now. I started 3 months before the pandemic began. ANS, I think, was the premier professional society for people in the nuclear engineering and technology discipline. And it's really been a pleasure these last 3 years to really join ANS as the CEO, go through an organizational transformation that is starting to pay off dividends for the organization and I think also the community at large. And I'm a very lucky person to have the job that I have. It makes it really easy to get up every morning and get to work.
Absolutely. You guys put out a bunch of great content as far as being an advocate for the industry and putting out great news publications, and we'll dive into a bunch of that. But give us a little bit more background on you. Where did you get your start? How did you find your way to this position?
Yeah, so I am a Washington, D.C. area native. Grew up here in Maryland, went to University of Maryland for undergrad. My start in my career was on Capitol Hill. I worked for 2 senators and a member of Congress over about an 9-year period in the 1990s. And made it in a job as chief of staff to a member of Congress from the suburbs of Detroit who happened to be a member of the Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee. And through his work on the committee, that's really where I got to learn and got to know about the nuclear industry and nuclear technology. They were dark times. And unlike today, where we've seen billions in new investment, back then, we were trying to hold on to the last $6 million worth of R&D funding at the Department of Energy. And really from that point onward, nuclear started its long climb back. After I worked in Congress, I left for a few years to go work for a university and had an interesting time there, worked on a couple of big projects and really was successful in helping get a long-term contract for a big federal contract for a big facility on campus. But I knew after 4 years, the university world really wasn't the place where I was going to spend the rest of my career. So I actually went out into private practice in 2002, worked for a large firm for 5 years, and then left to found the Washington office of another public affairs firm, subsidiary of a law firm out of Indiana, and really built that firm from just myself to 25 people and 60 clients and $7 million in annual revenue. And
That's awesome.
And all through that time, I built a nuclear practice. I started representing ANS as the Washington representative in 2005 that I did on a contractual basis. And A&S came with me to the new firm. And A&S was always the client. In the consulting business, you have something called a realization rate, right? Which is if you get paid a monthly retainer, you charge work against that retainer, and the realization rate is what you have left over and the profit that you have for the firm. And so my work for A&S, the realization rate was always highly negative because it was my favorite client. I worked far too much on it than my fellow principals in the firm would appreciate, but they understood. But 3 years ago, the leadership of A&S came to me and asked me if I'd be interested in considering becoming really the first CEO of A&S. They'd had executive directors in the past, but it just seemed like something that, first and foremost, it was really an opportunity to help renovate and transform the organization. And having been at a firm for 13 years and building it up, once it gets built, you start getting a little bored and looking for your next adventure. So it was the perfect confluence of events. And so here I am.
I totally understand. Yeah, there's some people that act as builders and some as operators. And if you're used to being a builder, that can be challenging.
Exactly.
Get kind of boring. You're like, there's no fires. We built this machine really well. It's just running.
Exactly. I found like in that time after I built the firm, I exercised my building impulse in other things. We have a local swim and tennis club in my neighborhood, so I was chair of the board, and we essentially built a new pool or entirely renovated the structure, and then worked on a couple of other nonprofit projects. But you're right. For me, if I'm not building something, then I'm bored.
Yeah. And you'd much rather be busy than bored. That's the mantra for me, at least.
Exactly.
So give me a little bit of context. How big is A&S? And I mean, them bringing on an executive director obviously has paid dividends. Now, you went from managing a team of about 25 people, but probably working on a bunch of projects. And obviously with 60 clients, you're going to have lots of things to focus on. But how did that experience, then maybe the role at the university, an administrative role?
So no, it was again a Washington representative role. So I was so represented them in Washington for a host of different things, but it was really more focused on federal funding and federal investment.
So how did those kind of prepare you for coming on to help out at A&S?
Yeah. So I think that the funny thing about it is a lot of what I do on a day-to-day basis is not too different than what I was doing before, but it's just in a completely different area. A lot of it is management, multiple simultaneous projects, managing deadlines, recognizing when schedules change, but keeping things moving forward, keeping the plates spinning, so to speak. Yeah. So a lot of what I do for A&S is a lot like client work or firm administrative work that I did before. The difference really is that all of the work that I do feels like it has a higher purpose now, right? That ultimately we're here to support every member of the nuclear community, frankly, whether you're a member or not. Obviously, we prefer you to be a member. But
I guess that's a good segue. What is A&S, American Nuclear Society?
Yeah.
Give us kind of a good overview of mission and
So it was created in 1954, really at the beginning of the atomic age, right after the Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace speech. And it was really designed to be the scientific and technical town square for this growing community of professionals that were involved in the technology, really born out of great optimism in those early years. And it's been through a lot of twists and turns in its time. There were times, and I think in the 1970s where A&S had almost 100 employees, but again, a lot of those were focused on manual processes that we now automate. But we're 10,000 members, 10,000 individual members, roughly 90 organizational members, corporations, utilities, suppliers, and the like. We have 18 professional divisions. So really the ultimate goal and the main aim of A&S is to serve the technical community, is to advance the science and technology of nuclear. And we run 10 to 12 meetings a year, including 2 national conferences and topical meetings. Again, 18 scientific or technical divisions that encompass the broad range of nuclear technology, everything from math and comp to thermal hydraulics and reactor physics, accelerator applications, fusion, all the way to decommissioning. And then we also have a young members group along with that. So we do have a substructure to A&S depending upon what your field is. We have Nuclear News, which is our magazine, 40,000 people.
Great publication. I read it every month. It's
Thank you.
fantastic.
Thank
Yeah.
you. 40,000 eyeballs every month. A couple of years ago, we launched the Nuclear News Wire, which is really the online companion to nuclear news. I think we went from when I started, I think there were like 400 or 500 downloads of the nuclear news PDF every month. But now we're closing in on 100,000 views every month of
Wow.
Nuclear Newswire content. So I think we've definitely opened up a new
That's
new
awesome. I
doorway
bet
there.
that's really impacted the industry. I get both publications, the monthly magazine and the email, and you guys send it out every day, which I'm very impressed at the amount of content and news that you guys are able to find and generate. It's tremendous. But I imagine having that different medium has really helped the industry.
I think so. I think that what we try to do is first, when I came in, Nuclear News operated on a monthly editorial calendar. They put out a magazine, so everything was we're working up to the time when we have to go to print to the magazine. So today we're on a daily editorial calendar. So it gives us a much better opportunity to cover current events, try to give a broad perspective on what's happening in the nuclear field, not just the utility industry and the current fleet, and not just labs or universities, but everything. And I have to say, John Fabian, who's the director of our publications department, has really done a tremendous job in leading his team away really 180 degrees from where they were operating before to where we are now. But I think the community deserves to be informed. And there's a lot of nuclear news out there. There are a lot of sources out there. And what we try to do is curate the best stories of the day. So if you're just going to read one, then you should be able to know everything you need to know by reading Nuclear Newswire every day. So it's really been exciting. But we also do standards. We have 3 technical journals. There are a host of things that a professional and scientific society does that we do as well. We're about 35 full-time employees right now. Still
Okay.
have a focus
Is
in
that
yeah.
within ANS, about 35 full-time employees?
So roughly 35
Gotcha.
35 employees. Of course, we have people that are
Man,
on
I would have put you guys bigger at that for how much you guys do. That you've got you're getting a lot of output without nearly as much horsepower as I thought you had.
When I started, we were in the high 40s. We were close to 50. And I think what we've really been able to do is over the last 3 years, digitize things that allow our staff to then focus on more strategic items. And so I say we have fewer staff, but the staff that we have are probably more qualified because they're not just doing administrative. We don't have so many people just doing administrative things anymore. It's really everyone that works for us is managing an effort, but they've got some time built in to be strategic.
Gotcha. Makes sense. So you're the CEO of the organization, and as you mentioned, the first person in this position, but there's also a president that turns over annually. So give us some context on how that dynamic functions and the different responsibilities between those roles.
Sure, you're right. We have what we have in ANS in the bylaws is a 1-year rotating presidency, and it rotates through 4 different subcategories of the community: utilities, suppliers, universities, and national laboratories. So each president each year comes from a different part of the nuclear community. I think historically, because the turnover was so quick, it really was the challenge for a president was really to have impact on the society or impact on the field in the time that they had as president. And I think it also became a challenge to the operational continuity of ANS. And so now I think having a CEO as the sort of the lead staff person, it allows the president to focus on the statutory duties that they have, right? So they act as essentially chair of the board and run the board process. But presidents also have an opportunity to engage more broadly in the community, right? And so every president gets an opportunity to choose his or her agenda. Steve Nesbitt, our previous president, was really interested in the nuclear fuel cycle and really reigniting the debate over our waste and fuel cycle policy. That's something he championed as president and is really still working for us on today, even as past president. Stephen Arndt, our current president, was in Sharm el-Sheikh for COP27, has been very engaged internationally and supporting and strengthening our ties with other organizations around the world. So every president really gets an opportunity to, in addition to the statutory work that they have, appointing committee chairs and approving certain awards, to really focus on the things that they're interested in. And generally speaking, I think all our presidents align with what's needed overall. So it's good variety, really.
Yeah. No, thanks for that context. That's really helpful and interesting. Yeah, seeing Arndt at the most recent winter meeting, it makes sense that he wants to go out and engage with the community. He's also a great dancer, participant in that.
Yes, he is. First one on the floor.
So you mentioned ANS is focused on technical dissemination, advocating for technical development in the industry. How do they accomplish that? You've got the news articles, but I want to dig into this idea a little bit more and unpack it with how that's getting accomplished, and then if there are other parts of the industry that ANS helps with or touches.
Yeah, I think the way to look at it is we have an internal mantra that we use, which is stronger science, better service, louder voice. So for the staff, right, we work to strengthen the science through our journals, through our meetings. Better service really means our professional development activities. We operate the professional engineering exam, for the PE exam for nuclear engineers. And so we strive to do better and to do more there. And then there's the louder voice part, right? Which is we've gone through, I think, a fair amount of refinement there, because at the end of the day, what our core mission is to be the voice of the nuclear professional community. And so that's a different voice with a different take than, say, the nuclear industry or the nuclear education enterprise or any one of the other sets of informal institutions within the nuclear sector. And so what is the nuclear professional community? It's 10,000 people. It's spread out across labs, universities, industry. They're all brought together by a love and enthusiasm for the technology, right? I don't think a lot of people fall into nuclear. I think they go out there and they find it, right? They go through a sort of a mental process of how can I be most helpful to the world, and then come to nuclear.
It's a common story. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody has a journey that they get there. And so I think that there is an enthusiasm within the community, but then at the same time, there's also a responsibility to provide non-biased technical information to people, right? That especially when we get into advocacy, I always caution people that there are limits here. We've got to be able to tell it like it is and not just paint a rosy picture of something and then be proven wrong later. If you think about how we operate in that space, we have a couple of areas of focus. One is within the policy space, making sure that policymakers and decision makers have a contextual understanding of nuclear when they're making decisions about laws or legislation or regulation. So again, We're not necessarily lobbying we have some de minimis lobbying that we do on appropriations every year. We support our university programs and have a couple of other things that we want to make sure there's continued funding, but it's only really a small part of what we do. The bigger part is having conversations with members of Congress, people in the executive agencies, bringing people together and having conversations where when people walk out of the room, they have a greater appreciation for the nuances of the issue, which is, I don't know, something you can argue that seems to be an increasingly rare supply in Washington these days. But again, our goal is we don't have a specific legislative agenda, but we see some outcomes. We want nuclear to be used in its highest and best way and see a set of policies that match with that. So we try to help foster those conversations.
That makes sense. That's a fantastic description of kind of what my curiosity was and how ANS might influence policy decisions and promote the development of new nuclear. So it falls under the louder voice column. So that That makes sense. And that voice has been getting louder, right? So I'm curious on your perspective, because I know you voiced some numbers to me at the most recent winter meeting. So maybe we can combine these two questions. What are these biannual conferences that you guys host? And then have you seen them grow?
Yes.
Have you seen interest in nuclear grow also?
Definitely interest in nuclear has grown substantially in the last few years. And what's most heartening is that you are seeing, I mean, you're fire to fission, right? We're seeing a lot of people thinking about fire to fission career opportunities coming in and joining A&S to learn more about
from fossil jobs to fission jobs.
Exactly. This is the fossil to the great energy transition. I think there's been a lot of interest in nuclear in the last couple of years. We have seen our meeting numbers go up, but you also have to throw COVID in there too, right? So our in-person meeting total for 2020 was 0. But I think what we were seeing before, so we're unlike a lot of other organizations, we actually have 2 meetings that run on an annual basis. And we've been trying to give
you guys characterize them as meetings, but they're conferences. They're conferences.
That's right. They're conferences. So generally, I think when in Phoenix last November, we had about 1,200 people. I would say we were about 1,000 in the summer. We have 2 meetings a year. We have our annual meeting, which happens in June, which corresponds with our governance calendar. That's where board and president terms begin and end. That's when new committees are formed. That's a lot of that meeting is given over to governance. And what we've also done we've been embedding topical meetings in those. So in a particular division may have a biennial meeting. We'll put that in with the annual meeting. The winter meeting tends to be a broader one that's more focused on the general environment, the general landscape, has more of a policy focus to it. Every other year we're in Washington, D.C. So that one tends to be our larger meeting, and it tends to attract a broader audience. But for both of them, anybody that's interested in the nuclear field can come to one of our meetings, sit in technical sessions, and really walk away learning about things.
So the annual meeting, I really enjoyed them. I thought they're structured incredibly well. I attended the one in Phoenix most recently. And I've been to a lot of conferences in my career, all the way from an afternoon with a small technical cohort to international, multinational conference in Monaco. And I think the way that you guys organized yours is excellent. And in fact, when I was there, I remember chatting with a guy from Korea, and we said, "Why are you here? This is the American Nuclear Society." And he said, of all the societies, even the World Nuclear Association, the IAEA, the ANS is viewed as a premier organization and one of the best for knowledge dissemination. So we come here to learn and network, and we think it's very productive.
Yeah, no, I think what makes an ANS meeting different, and what makes ANS different, is that the core unit of membership is an individual membership. People are there as individuals. They're not necessarily there as members of companies, or they're not representing their organizations when they come. They're there for themselves. And so we're primarily there to cater to the people. And so that makes our meetings a little bit different, probably maybe a little less formal, a little bit more chaotic, but I also feel like it generates more energy than you would get in a meeting where it's a group of corporate types.
So as an organization, do you guys have individual chapters throughout the country where members might meet, and you have a sub-president or director of chapters? And if yes, then how might somebody be interested in restarting one? This is kind of a leading question because my girlfriend's mom was interested in restarting one in Denver. She's runs a consulting company here, and asking the question for her.
Yeah, we do have local sections. I'd say we have about somewhere between 30 and 35 active local sections right now. Most of them are in the U.S. They're regional in the U.S., but we have a few that are around the world. We have a French section of the American Nuclear Society. We've our UAE local section's been really active as the Baraka plants have been built and brought Americans over there. Look, it's fairly easy to create a new chapter. I think that the question becomes, is the plan sustainable? Because I think what we find is there are a couple of factors happening here. One is the growth of the virtual environment and just the general expansion of digital services in many ways is taking over some of what a local section was really supposed to be. Because in the pre-internet age,
that
there
makes
was no
sense.
other way to get your information than to go and hang out with like-minded people. Whereas now you have an opportunity to do that
Yeah.
anywhere and everywhere. And so I
Literally
think
do what we're doing right now, having a video chat
exactly.
across the country.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so I think that what we're trying to do is we want to be able to foster communities, and wherever there's communities within our society. And so wherever there's an opportunity, what I'm trying to do is lower the barrier of entry so you can come in and become a local section. It's as easy as adopting a set of bylaws, and we create an account for you, and every member that selects a local section, the local section gets a dollar amount there. So I think we've really but the goal here is to make sure that the local sections ultimately are more tied together with the national organization. And that was when I joined ANS, it was right as the board was approving something called the ANS Change Plan 2020. And the big objective of that plan was to bring all of the far-flung entities of ANS a little bit closer together, including local sections. And starting this year, if you're a member of an ANS local section, you have to be an ANS member. You didn't have to be before, right? You could be part of the local section and not even join ANS, which is weird to me. But so I think that place-based groups are in this transition now, and we've seen some that have atrophied over the last couple of years, but we've also seen some new ones pop up too. So it's an interesting time.
Awesome. I want to dive into kind of advanced nuclear and new nuclear. So I'll preface this question with, I come from the private industry side and the upstream oil and gas side specifically, which
Yes.
we generate a lot of energy. And so I've got that background where I have a lot of industrial activity, a lot of effort that goes into deploying a lot of capital throughout the country and throughout the world. And when I look at the nuclear industry and trying to think about how you would develop similar projects in the nuclear industry, there's this regulatory hurdle that doesn't exist elsewhere, anywhere else in the energy industry, I'll say. So the question that I have is, how do we overcome that so that we can build more nuclear and build advanced reactors? And I know that this topic can be controversial, so we'll say this is Craig Piercy's opinion, not the opinion of ANS, but yes. I do want to know your perspective, because being at the center of this ecosystem, I think it's valued.
Right. Look, I think that I'm trying to think where to begin here, right?
Where to start?
I think, yeah, exactly.
I mean, now we're talking about just this.
Let's start out by saying nuclear is serious business, right? A big part of this business are highly trained people working with, materials and systems that if they aren't run properly can cause problems and hurt people. So I want to disabuse the notion that we also always talk about everything is safe. It's definitely safe, but it's safe because we have good people working it, not because there's an absence of danger. But I think that part of this is we are fighting against our caveman brains when it comes to nuclear, right? Nuclear sort of pushes all of our dread buttons. We saw it this week. A tiny cesium source falls off of a truck in Australia.
That was crazy.
And now look, we went back and we went to our expert team to try to estimate what the radiation dose of that would be. And yeah, it was 100 to 150 milliram an hour. So it was a pretty substantial source. It made the evening news, right? I mean, nuclear, we occupy the same space as shark attacks, where the incidence is low, but the unusual nature of it puts it up at the top of the headlines. And because of that, there's a lot of fear, a lot of misunderstanding and misperceptions about the technology. And there is this larger public battle that we have to fight between what we understand as the scientific and technical truth of the matter versus the way our brains perceive the risk of radiation that we can't touch and we can't smell and can't sense. And so I feel as though that line is moving in the right direction, and really where as a society we've been engaged and really have a commitment to be more engaged in the future is providing real-time information to members of the media and reporters and producers, and so that when nuclear stories break, there's always going to be this bow wave of concern and worst case scenario thinking, but that we can get reporters good real-time information on what's happening. And then that hopefully provides some more grounding to the reporting. We did this during the initial Russian invasion of Ukraine and the Russian occupation of the Zaporizhia nuclear plant. And we were able to get reporters fairly quickly information that the reactor wasn't on fire, it was an accessory structure and so forth. We see an opportunity to continue to work with media to improve their understanding of the technology. And then it's really about the public. And I think when we think about the public, a lot of that education happens in the classroom pretty early on. And I think we've made a real commitment to be more engaged in K-12 STEM classrooms around the country and in K-12 STEM education, whether that's in school or after school. We've had programs, we've developed a curriculum, but what we really want to be able to do is expand our reach into the classroom. Our goal for the next couple of years is any teacher in the United States that wants to teach nuclear technology to their class in a way that's aligned with state education standards. We can give them the kit, we can give them the instruction, we can bring somebody from the community to come into the classroom if we want to. We can serve the need of those teachers. But ultimately, we have to make sure that every child in this country that goes to school has some basic understanding of the technology so that they're, as adults and as voters and citizens, they're better prepared to make decisions about these things. So that's really where we're focused on the outside. I think on the technology side, it's really exciting times. And I think that there's still large companies out there that are involved in nuclear. That hasn't changed. But these new startups with venture funding and folks with experience in Silicon Valley are breathing a new energy into the innovation ecosystem of nuclear. And I think it's really exciting. Now, you touched on the regulatory scheme and how you came from the other side of the business, and nuclear is much more tightly regulated, right? Because of the sort of the unique attributes of the technology. But I think by getting the public fear level down, by improving understanding, we are going to, fear of radiation is the inflammation in the system that makes everything
Really the root cause of,
it's really the root cause. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Meaning the rules are very strict for nuclear, and I'll say unfairly protecting against a hazard that, in my opinion, the data doesn't demonstrate exist, or the systems that we have in place, not, and I don't want to attribute regulation to be the cause of the systems being sufficiently safe. I think the technology and the design and the understanding how to operate these systems is the root cause. But there's a perceived hazard that has been inflated. And I think that's, just like you said, driven by the public's misunderstanding of radiation, and specifically radiophobia and being fearful. And while you're talking about that, I thought of an analogy that I'll voice it and see if you agree. It's kind of like people that might be afraid of flying, even though statistically all of the data demonstrates that it's very unlikely that you'll die on a commercial flight ever. You have to be super lucky for that to happen. And nuclear might be a comparable technology, but even there are a lot of people that get on a plane and they still are very nervous about it. So people might still be very nervous about nuclear. Similarly, though, you're very likely to be killed by a vehicle or a different energy technology like fossil fuels or coal, and yet people are just okay with it. So yeah, I think there's this normalization effort that you guys with ANS are doing actively, and I think it's very beneficial for society.
Yeah, no.
Would you say that's a decent metaphor?
I love it. And actually I do use it from time to time. And I use my mother-in-law as an example because she lives in the UK. She loves to see her grandkids. She loves to see her daughter, but she does not like flying. But she loves her daughter more, right? And so she will get on the plane, she will travel, and at the end of the day later, it'll be fine. And I think for nuclear, yes, we still have this aggregate fear level amongst the public about nuclear, but at the same time, we realize we have all these challenges, right? And when we care about the planet more, right? I hope we do. And I think we care about clean air and we care about having electricity available when we need it. And so my sense is that we are seeing the shift here, right? That I don't know that we necessarily we don't need to get everybody to love nuclear. I think we just need to have people understand it a little bit better and accept it enough that that in their priorities, it's more important that we stem carbon emissions and protect the planet than worry about nuclear. I agree. I think there is one word that we really should be debating here, that we can boil it down to one word, and that word is reasonable. Okay. And reasonable shows up in the nuclear world, right? We have a paradigm in the nuclear world called as low as reasonably achievable. Now, that makes sense. I think everybody can agree on the concept. The question is, what's reasonable, right? Is it does industry chase every last millirem of occupational exposure at a cost of millions of dollars? Does that make sense? How do we define reasonable? The NRC's regulatory principle is reasonable assurance of adequate protection of public safety and health. But again, it all starts with reasonable, and I think reasonable, the definition of reasonable, there's no one person that can pull the lever on that. I think we're never going to have a legal definition of reasonable broadly, but I think that we can move the needle on that public conversation about what is reasonable. And part of what is reasonable is looking at the costs of not doing something, not developing nuclear. And so I think that really is where the conversation needs to.
I love the way that you characterize that. And I've discovered the same thing in my study of the regulations and the reasons that the industry exists as it does, and I completely agree. My opinion would be, from a utilitarian point of view, it's maximize the benefit for humans and minimize the environmental and harm that humans experience. And if you're preventing nuclear from being built at the expense because you want to protect against radiation, but then you build use a different form of energy generation that ultimately kills more people, that's unreasonable. And I think having that shift in mindset, and a lot of people will point the finger at the regulator, but I don't know that it necessarily starts with them. I think it starts with the people that you're addressing, which is the public, because then we can influence Congress to change the mandate of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which then they can form a real opinion about what's reasonable.
Yeah.
Or transform the way that they think about it.
Look, first of all, and I think the regulation always tends to be the boogeyman. And I think sometimes regulation becomes the boogeyman because companies that might be working on a license, preparing a license application, maybe sometimes don't do their homework and then blame it on the other guy.
Yeah.
I do think there's some of that, but also recognize that, yes, the NRC is a risk-averse organization. And part of that is because the way the licensing process is structured. If you are looking at a Part 52 license, right, you want to use that licensing pathway to get your reactor approved. Basically, what you're asking the NRC to do is, I want you to approve everything up front, because once you approve it, then I can do it and you don't really have much to say about it. And somebody has to sign on the dotted line of that design certification. So it makes it a tougher process. So I think we've changed some of the processes around. But I do think, that also some of it is because there are rules that apply for all of government that slow things down, right? That just the internal concurrence processes that occur within government are super slow. Anything related to NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, right? Environmental impact studies, the public hearing and adjudication process of those things. All of those things take time. It affects everyone broadly. It's why we have a harder time. Things are more expensive in this country because we go through these processes. But I don't think that the regulatory process and the regulatory body is going to be the primary determinant as to how successful nuclear is in the next few years. I think we have issues with fuel. We have issues with a new supply chain, right? We have issues of financing. We have issues of siting. There are a lot of challenges that we are going to have to surmount in the next few years to really achieve success. And when I think of success, I'm thinking of a significant commercial scale up of new nuclear technology in the 2030 timeframe. That could be 28, 29, 30, 31, whatever it might be. But it's in that zone, in that landing zone right there. That's what we all need to be working toward. I think that's what most people are working toward. And so let's not let arbitrary deadlines put us off from what we know we need to do in order to accomplish that objective.
I love that perspective. That's fantastic. Craig, we're running up on our time. I can tell you and I could talk for several hours and solve many of the problems of the world, or at least come up with a strategy for it. But give us, to end us, or end this, let's get a perspective on, if that became real, what does that look like? 2027 to 2020, call it 2033. How does the world transform between now and then that things are happening? Give us a picture of hope.
Yeah, look, my picture of hope is that if you fast forward 10 years from now, we're going to be in a society where energy is becoming significantly cleaner, but it's still plentiful, right? I think that's the challenge. I always think about Bill Magwood, former NRC commissioner, at one point was at a conference and he was talking in the context of geologic waste repositories and how do we make sure that we tell the humans of the future where we buried things, and how best to do that. And he said one thing that always stuck with me. He goes, it depends on what kind of future you're expecting. Is it Star Trek or Planet of the Apes? And so I feel like in the next 10 years, we're going to be moving toward more of a Star Trek model of better living through and better and wider prosperity through technology. You already see it now, right? We still have a lot of people in poverty, in energy poverty, but it's a lot less than it was 20 years ago. And if we can crack the clean energy conundrum and really be able to provide plentiful, clean energy around the world that enables all of the other technologies that make our lives better, we'll be in a better place. I do believe that there'll be pandemics and there'll be wars, but society is marching forward, and we're increasingly realizing that we can't power what we need for our future without cracking the atom, right? Whether we're splitting them apart or pushing them together, we need the power of the atom to get us where we need to go. And so I'm really optimistic about the future. And I think we'll be driving some cool cars in 10 years. And we're gonna have some great tech in our houses, and life will be better.
What a fantastic way to end. Craig Piercy, thanks so much.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Take care.